Thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this incredible community of, we've got builders, we've got investors, tech folks, and I think one thing that we really all have in common is this the idea to really get together and to build and scale. So we may have differing opinions, and what's great about this conference is, whether we believe in one global network to rule them all, mini networks, enterprise, disruptors, ICOs. Bottom line is, at least from our perspective, and this is the feedback we've heard from customers, and please, we're always open for feedback, so if we get this wrong, we have very thick skin, we love to hear from you. But we believe that at the core there's a runtime. So this is technology, there is software, there is networking, and there is this idea of a runtime, and what you really have to do is think about how do you manage that runtime, how do you manage the software. And so some of the things we've seen is that it all starts with a pattern. You really want to look at going from experimentation, going from how do I actually take that software and marry it with an idea. And what we've seen is that there's kind of these three patterns that really start to emerge. When people really start to get going, whether it's from a crypto perspective or from an industrial enterprise blockchain perspective, they think, okay, I see something here for digital assets. So maybe whether it's tokenizing something physical, representing it on a ledger, or perhaps dealing directly with cryptocurrency itself. If I'm in the enterprise space, perhaps I see a cross-organizational workflow. And I think one of the things that's sort of missing in the discussion about enterprise blockchain is it's really fundamental to multi-party so that you have these relationships to deduplicate data and to solve for reconciliation. Because as we continue to globalize, as networks expand, these become really vital concerns. And then finally, high assurance audit logs. So as I expand into this area of multi-party business, how do I get that high assurance audit view? And again, it really comes down to a network strategy. So, okay, I've got this use case. I'm starting to build. I'm starting to develop. Hopefully, I'm getting a cross-functional interaction between business, disruptor, and my tech folks. But then now I need to think about how do I put that on a public network? Do I put it on a permissioned private network? Brian did a really nice job articulating some of those different classes of networks today. And some of the examples we see is things like, digitizing property assets. That could sort of lend itself to a public chain, especially if we're dealing with a national land title registry. But also you could have some very permissioned private use cases as well. So we're not saying that you necessarily have to pick and choose and stick in one lane, but you should be free to innovate. But then the problem with that innovation is the actual building is difficult. What gets lost in the conversation is this is really where people want to be, is writing that business logic. They have the great idea. They have the notion of how to digitize something, how to make a token, how to make an asset. But then they go to the IT folks and say, okay, I want to do this thing. This technology is still very nascent. It still has to be networked. It still has to live within the context of either a traditional data center or a public cloud environment, or perhaps a mix of the two. And so how do I actually get into the novelty of some of the new programming languages that are being introduced by smart contracts? Or how do I deal with classic enterprise security and compliance concerns? We've heard a lot about GDPR today. Well, what about PCI DSS? Certainly a lot of these are payment systems and financial systems. PCI over the last 15 or so years has been very mature and robust about articulating specific security controls, and yet we still have payment card hacks all the time. And yet nothing of this kind really exists from a technical security perspective when you're talking about running either a public node that's interfacing with a public blockchain network or a permission node, because again, that still has to live in a container, a VM, a computer somewhere. How do you harden that? And you got to start by really decomposing. What do we mean? What's the anatomy of an actual blockchain application? It starts from bare metal up. You've got to run it. You've got to have a machine to host it. But then there's orchestration because it's a network technology. It perhaps has to auto scale. You've got different ledger interfaces and protocols that can ride on top of that. As a developer, you may bring a smart contract code. You may bring chain code depending on your protocol. You're certainly going to need APIs because there's going to be some kind of interaction with legacy systems. I don't think that blockchains, we've seen this time and time again with disruptive technology, is they augment and extend systems that come before them. They don't necessarily displace it. I don't see anybody, at least that I'm talking to, that's ready to throw out their SAP system or their Oracle financial system and start from scratch with blockchain. Instead, what they want to do is they want to integrate it. They're looking for frictionless interfaces to extend and augment those systems into multi-party where they don't have span of IT control. And so it really gets down to personas. You really have to start to think about, okay, so I've identified a business problem. I started down this path of innovation, but now to really kind of take that leap, because DevOps, what we say about that term, developer operations, it's really about bringing these different stakeholders together, understanding their needs. If I'm a developer, I need a test net. I need building, I need packaging, I need environments, I need collaboration capabilities. If I'm a participant, I want to transact, and I want to transact across the network. But I also have security concerns, because again, this is value we're talking about, either money or assets. So I really have to have security concerns that marry up with those transactions, those SLAs. We do believe there is an operator, and this is going to be maybe somewhat controversial, is there's this talk that certainly this is a decentralized type of technology, but we believe, need that operator because the network itself has guarantees, SLAs, and in fact, that's what we're going to see from Technobrain. So what I'd like to do is bring up Saj and really kind of talk about sort of this idea of the operator and what they have to bring. So let me jump ahead a couple slides, and I'll give you the control.
Thank you. Good morning, all. My name is Saj, and basically I want to elaborate on what we have done working with Microsoft on the Azure Workbench and the related technologies. Basically, what we wanted to highlight is how we built something very quickly using blockchain, IoT, and the cloud application with a business scenario that was relevant in this market. Technobrain was working with a lot of revenue authorities, and I'm sure you'll see that all the revenue authorities in the region are having a problem that they want to solve, is to make sure that trade takes a lesser amount of time, and removing all the barriers and middlemen involved in the trade. So one of the scenarios that we had was transit cargo movement. So if you see, I'm an importer in Zambia, and I import goods from China. And when the goods come from China, it comes through a Durban port or a Dar es Salaam port. And what happens is they go over through the other countries before it ends up into, say, Zambia. So what happens is, if you look at the experience there, a trader has to basically do the declaration of, the exporter does the declaration. When it reaches Durban, he has to give a record to the revenue authority, SARS in this particular case, work with freight forwarders, make sure there is a transit bond submitted in. So there are a lot of transactions and middlemen or third parties involved in the transactions. What was the challenge? If it was not tracked, you would find that I declared I'm going to Zimbabwe or Zambia, but on the way I might decide to dump my goods, and as a result revenue authorities lose the customs duty. So there was a problem, and we also wanted to eliminate, and you find in most of the borders, if you have traveled through Zimbabwe on the Bait Bridge border, you would find the kind of queues. The trucks are lining up hours to get cleared and move into the other countries. So basically all resulting in problems. So we are already working with number of revenue authorities on transit cargo movement on our IoT platforms. And so we're currently working and managing close to 30,000 trucks on a daily basis on our platforms on transit cargo movement. And we're working with organizations like WCO and various other revenue authorities. So with that context, we wanted to see how we could give a value add and upgrade using the Microsoft technologies and few other partners to give a better solution and actually improve. So that's the basic context. We started working with Microsoft on Workbench. And what we did is we started capturing the data from the trucks, and we sealed each truck with a seal, which is called the seal, which is RFID enabled, and tracking and container locking the seals, and ensuring that the data is submitted and straight into our application. And so it's a cloud application that we have, and it moves into our Azure network. From there, it goes into the Ethereum in this particular case, which we used. So what was happening, if you see, right from the journey that begins in, say, in this particular context, let's say Durban, we seal the vehicles, and as they enter and pass through the whole country, we make sure that we have the complete logs of the movement. any tampering, if they're trying to unlock or remove the seals or do any tampering on the containers, we get a full traceability, and immediate alerts are given out to the command control room so that they can make sure. So we also had the geofence completely done, and the biggest advantage is when they were crossing border and moving on to the other country, they did not have to do the whole work again of filling up the forms or doing the stuff. So you could actually trigger what is called a kind of smart contract to get the bonds released. And in case there is a violation, then we could hold on to see how the penalties or stuff could be applied. So if you look at this is the kind of transit domain in the sub-Saharan Southern African region. If you see Dar es Salaam as a port or Durban as a port, how transit is moving into various countries, you will find Durban is a major hub, and it's actually sending goods through the country into multiple other countries all the way to Congo. You'll also find that in the eastern region, and this particularly is a network that we are forming with just an example here, like Revenue Authority of South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and we have a overall transit ledger as an operation, and country-specific data being kept in each country, and then goods information being handshaked and given out to the other revenue authorities as transit happens. So I think with this as a scenario that we wanted to show how we worked with Microsoft on building this on a quick scale and giving value and as an upgrade. So at this point.
And then one of the key things that we did with TechnoBrain to really drive this home was you have these customs authorities and these government agencies, and they're looking to TechnoBrain to deliver this solution because they don't really necessarily have this innovative agile expertise to take care of building a cloud architecture, putting a blockchain system into that, and then networking it across their entire network with these other revenue authorities, all with this IoT integration. And so what we were able to do working with TechnoBrain is to take these DevOps practices and actually build the TechnoBrain delivery program around those. So starting with things like, for instance, configuration management. How do we create a build package, infrastructure as code, that we could actually stream and hand over to the revenue authorities so that they could opt to either run it in, maybe they want to run it on-prem, maybe they want to run it in their own cloud deployment, perhaps they want to run and trust TechnoBrain to run it on their behalf. How do we actually deal with continuous integration? Because TechnoBrain is very agile in terms of revving these smart contract applications based on the feedback and the input they're getting from the IoT device manufacturers or from the customs authorities themselves. This is all very new, very innovative stuff, so we don't pretend to know. We're really just trying to get an MVP out and then relentlessly ship on top of that. And so we're constantly getting new feedback, new requirements that go into a shared backlog that then Microsoft, TechnoBrain, and the various revenue authorities across these Southern African trade networks can all collaborate on and agree and prioritize. And so really that's the real value add that TechnoBrain is kind of bringing to this partnership, is working directly with those authorities, helping them to prioritize. Because maybe the South African point of view is we want more network throughput, but maybe in Zambia, we're having latency and connectivity issues, and we're getting false positives from the IoT devices. So how do you actually adjudicate when there's once you form this network, and all of a sudden people have they start using it, and they start getting very pointy and opinionated about which features or requirements they want to come next. So it's really critical to have a great network operator that can kind of field those, sort of adjudicate and smooth things over so that everybody's focused on the mutual incentives, the win-win-win, because again, the eyes on the prize here is that if the trade network scales, we really take a lot of the sand out of the gears out of intra-African trade. So if we can reduce those queues that Saj was talking about at the border, and we can really get trust, and we can really get expedited freight handling, then all of these revenue authorities win. They all get to collect the duties that they expect. They all get to go faster. What it means from a blockchain perspective is, infrastructure as code is how we deploy nodes. It's not just, I'm going to go to the public, Geth, Ethereum, GitHub, and do it all manually. No, we want to set up a pipeline. We want to have regulated builds that have hardened configuration for those nodes to broadcast those out across those network. Configuration management, we want to deal with the critical system files. So for instance, if you're working with a technology like Corda, you don't want everybody to just have node.conf access where they could go in and potentially, really mess up the critical functions of the ledger in a way where you stop getting the immutable properties and the transactions recorded. Release management is really key. Yes, we heard earlier today that we need to have this assurance that there's a stable blockchain protocol. That's fine. But the underlying tech is always going to change. We heard Brian talk about Hyperledger 1.4 just dropped out. Well, what's going to happen in these networks is they'll see these improvements come from the ledger companies and from the ledger projects and providers. They're going to want those improvements to go into their networks. If I'm this South African or Southern African free trade area and I know a new version of Ethereum or Quorum or any other technology is available, I want that on my network because presumably that's going to give me better privacy, better security, better throughput. So how do you, while you're still taking real transactions coming in, how do you actually do that in a way where you can seamlessly bring the new ledger version, the new tech onto the network online so that the participants and the actors, again, going back to those 4 stakeholders, devs want to develop off it, participants want to transact off it, operators need to know how to run it. How do we actually do that in a way that's very non-disruptive? And really that key is this pipeline and this continuous deployment, continuous integration approach. There's also tremendous security benefits as well, because this is something I feel like that gets all too often ignored. It's great that we talk about risk management from the perspective of the currency dimension, the crypto dimension, stable coins, all these other things. Those seem to be driving the risk management conversation, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But unfortunately, there's not enough oxygen devoted to what about the runtime? What about the software? How do we make sure that, these are both networks and applications. Doing just one is super complicated in the modern day and age, given the sophistication of threat actors around the world. We're seeing this encroachment of surface area from data center to cloud to network applications to serverless to mobile. Blockchain is not keeping up. And so we really need to make it sure that, by doing continuous deployment, by doing constant refreshes of our infrastructure, that makes it much harder for the bad actors to keep up. Because just when they think they found the exploits for, let's say, Hyperledger 1.3, boom, here comes 1.4. Now let's propagate 1.4 across the network. Countermeasures. How do we think about actually hardening those? How do we make sure that, if we're going to have to expose an RPC endpoint across the network, here's one of those real, commercial pitches for cloud. If a blockchain network is successful and you're running it on-prem, woe be unto your poor network admin who then has to open up all of these crazy firewall ports to all the peers to transact either publicly or privately. That's a lot of untrusted and unknown peers now that have direct connections into your data center. Why not push that out to the cloud at arm's length where you can have those connections securely managed? You can still protect your critical operations because we do believe in a hybrid world, but make it much more robust in terms of having better management security, better viewpoint, and more of a segmentation between the network traffic between multiple organizations and then what's critical to your individual organization, on-prem. We also then see compliance benefits because, again, if you put this in a pipeline and you make it streamed, our pipeline of choice, of course, is Azure DevOps, but it works very well with Jenkins, with TeamCity, with any of the latest and greatest, CI/CD pipeline processes, provided you have an operator like Techno, is you really want to establish that automation so that when the day comes for external audit to show up and to really start to interrogate this network, you can actually look to the pipeline, look to the build sequence, look to the pull request history, to the branching strategies, all of these things coming together to really inform the audit and the investigations. Because again, especially when you're dealing with government regimes, when you're dealing with government agencies, they're going to want that visibility. They're going to want that assurance that those controls have been embedded, they've been automated, and the more that we can kind of take human sort of bespoke hand cobbling together of blockchain applications out of it and make this kind of a factory automation model, then we're going to get much more better fidelity. And I think we're also going to drive much more enterprise adoption. So just some samples. Would be remiss if we didn't have some architecture diagrams to kind of close with. When we talk about infrastructure as code, we mean exactly that. So these are actual build files in Azure. We use a format called Azure Resource Manager, ARM. It's a JSON language. We also work very closely with a technology called Terraform for multi-cloud scenarios. The idea is you really want to script out everything you need to run that blockchain node. So whether it's a VM, it's a container, it's all your network interfaces, how you're going to have network configurations to find and discover the other participants in the network, bring that all together in this code, and then version that code itself so that the participants know when a new version is available, they can take it, ingest it into their environment, and upgrade their ledger infrastructure. As we mentioned, a lot of times this is containerized. So we see lots of instances and patterns where folks will put this in a technology like Kubernetes. Basically, it makes it very portable so that you could package it in a way. And again, for somebody like Technobrain, you could then set up different deployment package models. So if South Africa wants to run on-prem and Zambia wants to run in cloud, fine. We may standardize that on a container pattern that, again, makes it very easy to replicate, even though we may have great environmental differences. So I think with that, we can maybe open it up to some questions.
Thank you very much. So any questions in the audience, please raise your hand. We'll get the microphone to you.
Thanks for that talk, guys. Just from a cost perspective, what has been your observation? Because our observation is that your Azure infrastructure, if you run blockchain, any node, the data grows exponentially and it becomes very expensive.
Yeah, it's definitely a key consideration. And I think what you have to do is look at cost holistically, right? Because certainly scenario one is if I run a blockchain app on-prem, I think I have to think about the cost of the infrastructure refresh. So I have to procure hardware. I have to procure network connectivity. I have to pay people that look at all of those roles in a much more segmented way as opposed to kind of a DevOps perspective. And then that cost has to get aggregated and amplified, across the network. And so what becomes very difficult is if you have a provider that provides an application and then tells each organization, go source your own infrastructure and hardware to deliver that, it makes cost certainty very difficult, and it also makes that infrastructure somewhat static to scale. So if all of a sudden that network grows exponentially because more participants want to get involved, let's say we break out of South and East Africa, and now all of a sudden you have the African Free Trade Area coming, how do you have cost certainty? Yes, with Azure, it's a different cost model because it's, you're going from CapEx to OpEx, and you're also, again, it's consumption-based charging. So you really, what you can do though is model that out. There's a tool called the Azure Calculator that's available on the Azure website. And, working with operators like Technobrain, they really try to get to this place where you can combine the systems integration charges, the operation charges, and the cloud charges as more of a service-based model and say, hey, I think I'm only going to do X transactions per month. Here's the type of consumption I want to pay for. That becomes possible in a cloud model and not so much on an on-prem model.
Peter.
Just a question. So if we take the Bitcoin blockchain, mostly it hasn't been running on Azure. It's been running on, in the early days, university students, PCs and under their bed in their dorm room. So there was no security, and yet it hasn't to date been hacked. Now you're looking to put all of this additional security on, which I understand is nice from an enterprise perspective. The biggest problem in a blockchain world is either loss of private keys, so you can now no longer sign a transaction against a particular private key, or compromise of those private keys. So I suppose my question more is our experience and working with blockchains for a while now is that private key management or key management is the most important thing. Now I know Microsoft have a great solution. Once again, back to cost, it's quite an expensive solution if you're starting to do volumes of transactions. Can you talk a little bit around how you kind of, so for me, I suppose my question is I would love to see less of the typical enterprise security and maybe more focus on cheaper key management solutions from Microsoft.
I think that's excellent, fair feedback, right? I think that certainly, we've traditionally approached key and secret management from an enterprise perspective. So thinking about it like, a corporate organization wants to lock down their SSL certs, or they want to use an HSM. So we operate a fleet of HSMs around the world. It's basically HSM as a hardware security module as a service. Those are very expensive to run. So obviously there's a cost of goods sold calculation that's going on there, but certainly I think there's room for feedback from the blockchain community to say, that's great, but we need just a subset of that. Microsoft, can you come up maybe with a different pricing model or tiering model so that we can get the benefits of key management and key protection and all the great security stuff, but maybe we only need sort of a fraction of that. So that's exactly what we're hoping for from the community, is those kind of feedback, and even if it's even more to the, say, user story level of precisely, like I assume you're talking about Azure Key Vault. So if there's things about Azure Key Vault that, look, give me just 30% of Azure Key Vault so that I can put my, wallet private public key pairs in, that would be wonderful for us.
We've got a question right here.
Hi, Jim Wojcik from Health Digital Associates. Your discussion there about the trade and supply across governments, I'm wondering how you handle the areas of governance, of data locality and sovereignty. How do you coordinate those consortia of governments to approving changes to come through within your DevOps procedures?
So great question. The nice thing about being part of Azure is we don't have to necessarily go this alone from a blockchain perspective. So with the scale and reach of Microsoft, we've got government customers around the world in every jurisdiction imaginable looking to some degree of digital transformation to move some process to some cloud workload that we offer. And so as a part of that process, we've evolved a whole compliance team that's both technical compliance as well as legal and regulatory engagement. So we actually have kind of a sort of a playbook for if we target a specific government impacting use case, we could engage our regulatory affairs team, our technical compliance team, and really what it's about is taking that specific regulator on a journey to really understand these are the Microsoft technical controls you get in Azure, these are the security the administrative and policy controls. We're also the most compliant cloud in the industry. We have 75 different security and privacy certifications and counting. And we actually make all of that information available on our Service Trust portal to any government or financial institution that really wants to hold us to account to make sure that we have the appropriate policies and procedures and that those map to the appropriate government requirements in whatever jurisdiction we need to.
Thank you so much.